Sustainability Manager, Camille Carrera, Transit Administrator, Nelson Ortega, Code Enforcement Manager, William McKinney, Building Manager, Julian Long, Urban Programs Manager, Sam Durfee, Planning Manager, and Matt Sullivan, Community Development Director.
Thank you.
And Alderman Jettie has joined us.
Okay.
I'm here too.
Oh, yes. Tom's here.
Yeah, and Alderman Lopez.
Thrilled.
Okay. First item on the agenda is public comment. I don't see anyone, so, okay. Communications,
There are none,
unfinished business,
none,
new business resolutions,
none,
new business ordinances,
none.
tabled in committee.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make the motion to remove from the table R-23-125, which is the budget.
The motion on the floor is to remove R-23-125 from the table. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. This evening, we're going to be discussing Community Development Division and Departments 153, 155, 170, 171, 182, 185, 109, and 186. Director Sullivan, you want to bring everybody up? We're going to be starting with building, well, after you give your opening. We're going to be starting with building inspection with revenues on 161 and appropriations on 162. If you'd like to give an overview of
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Matt Sullivan, Community Development Division Director. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this evening, as we do every year, and thank you for providing some real estate for members of our team to sit with you and join you this evening. I know that you have an opportunity to work with many of these folks in their various capacities, but you'll have an opportunity this evening to hear briefly from them on the work that they've done in 2023 and what they're looking forward to in 2024, and certainly the budget to support those efforts as well. And I tend to believe myself, and I know you all appreciate this is a good opportunity to build relationships with the folks that are doing the work on behalf of the city. So they'll probably kick me for saying this, but if you have any questions unrelated to the budget that we might answer tonight, we're happy to do that as well, subject to the permission of the chair, of course.
it's associated with the budget part of your division.
So again, thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. I wanted to quickly introduce members of the team. I expect they'll do so after I do this briefly. Down to the left, we have Camille Correa, the Nashua Transit System Administrator. We have Sam Durfee, our newest member of the management team within the Planning and Zoning Department. I'm Matt Sullivan, Community Development Division Director. Nelson Ortega, the longest tenured of the managers here in the city, and our Code Enforcement Department Manager, Julian Long with Urban Programs, Deb Chisholm of Sustainability, and last but certainly not least, Bill McKinney, our Building Official and Building and Safety Department Manager. Mr. Chair, if I may, I wanted to quickly make a few comments to provide some context for the discussion tonight, as I have done in the past. And I want to start by communicating perhaps the most blunt message of the evening, and that is that the budget before you this evening on behalf of community development represents an increase of 8.1% from the prior fiscal year. But I do want to take a minute to quickly qualify what's behind that 8.1%, because it's not simply an increase of salaries or any clear line items. There are in fact two items that lead to that substantial increase, and I wanted to quickly touch on those. The first is actually the result of substantial conversations over the last year with the mayor and the financial management team and those in leadership about the movement of certain expenses that have traditionally been done as part of what we refer to as the escrow process, but sort of a supplemental budget process. Movement of items that are traditionally considered operating expenses as part of that escrow process into the place where they truly belong, and that being the operating budget. So the example of that you'll see this evening when I speak about my community development budget is the movement of Your Voice, Your Choice, the city's participatory budgeting program, into the community development budget proper, so that it becomes a part of our programming on a year-to-year basis moving forward, and certainly based on many continuous and consecutive years of successful the implementation of that program. So that's been moved into the community development budget. The second is actually a modification within the hydroelectric operations budget. It's a substantial change. That is the result of a contract approved by this body as part of the Finance Committee process last year when we modified our contract with Essex Hydroelectric, who's responsible for the day-to-day operations of the two hydroelectric facilities here in the city of Nashua. That contract underwent not only a monetary change or compensation change, but also a structural change in the way that their expenses are charged to the city, and therefore the monies that we owe to them at the end of each quarter. Ms. Chisholm will speak to that modification in a bit more detail as we get into her section of the budget. But together, those are two substantial modifications to our budget. Removing those two for just a moment, our budget actually represents an increase of 3.8%, much more in line with the mayor's guidance on operational budgets this year. With the exception of those modifications, the two primary changes are, of course, salaries and benefits. In fact, that's really the only changes you'll see within the budgets presented before you this evening, and represent very de minimis modifications. I did want to get ahead of a few questions. I, fortunately or unfortunately, depending upon how you look at it, I've watched each of your budget review meetings to date. I've seen some consistent questions that have been asked related to staffing and, of course, to changes made as part of the mayoral budget review process. We currently have 3 and soon to be 4 open positions across community development, 1 each within the sustainability department, the building safety department, the code enforcement department, and 1 that may be pending with our transit department as well that we're aware of. I think you'll hear this evening, and I'll certainly reiterate for the record, that despite even some long-standing vacancies in those positions, the department managers before you this evening will speak to the criticality of those positions moving forward in ensuring that our departments and certainly our division is executing to the highest extent possible or to the maximum efficiency possible. So certainly we have plans to fill each of those 4 positions moving forward, and we can speak to those details this evening. I also want to speak just briefly to the fact that we've had some in-depth conversations as part of the budget review, or rather the finance process, and 2 contracts and 1 bond that came before you over the last year since our last budget process. One being the hydroelectric facility, $1.5 million that was discussed in some detail. The other being the First Transit contract, our operational provider for the Nashua transit system, and the increase that just was recently approved. And the third being a modification to that Essex Hydroelectric provider contract. All 3 of those, I think, resulted in a more in-depth conversation than I believe we're expecting tonight, or that the chair is expecting tonight. But certainly we're happy to address some higher level questions related to each of those increases and to the extent they impact the operational budget. Finally, I just wanted to touch on those modifications that were made subsequent to the mayoral review process. I know that's an important part of this committee's consideration. And I want to comment briefly that we had I myself had several meetings of review with the mayor and the budget team, including CFO Griffin, Administrative Services Director Tim Cummings, Strategic Initiatives Analyst Megan Karen, and of course our Senior Finance Manager Janet Graziano. We did have several requests, or multiple requests I should say, not several, but multiple requests that we ultimately modified and removed from the budgets that you'll see before you this evening, mostly related to the capacity that we're seeing from permits and land use activities generally. We're seeing a lot of activity in that regard, and so I think our department managers brought forward some requests that they're seeing some need for. But ultimately, through that collaborative budget process and really being a part of the city team when it comes to budgeting and respecting the city's goals for financial health over the coming year, we ultimately come before you this evening being fully supportive of the components included in the budgets before you and fully comfortable to move forward with what's been proposed. And we thank everyone involved in the budgeting process that resulted in this budget being presented to you. Lastly, I'll just say that urban programs is listed on your agenda for this evening, but as is the case in prior years with urban programs being fully federally funded, we do not plan to present or discuss that budget in detail this evening. Urban Programs Manager Julianne Long, who has a great depth of knowledge about the department's operations and ongoing activities, is happy to answer questions subsequent to this meeting or at any point in time, but we do not intend to address that directly this evening, again, based on that federal funding component. With that, Mr. Chair, at your pleasure, I'd like to pass it off to Mr. Bill McKinney to provide an overview of the Building Safety Department and their activities.
Mr. McKinney. Thank you, Chairman Dowd and members of the committee. I'm Bill McKinney. I'm the building official and manager for the Department of Building Safety for the City of Nashua. I'm going to give a quick summary of our budget, if you will. So beginning in FY24, we're proposing a budget of $852,117, which is a 4.2% increase over FY 2023. Most of our significant increases in our budget are union contractual obligations related to salaries and benefits. Our department remains quite busy, as you know. In 2022, we were very busy. We remain very busy in FY 2023, and I foresee in FY 24 we will. In the last year to date, we've issued 990 permits, which is a 7.4 increase over FY 22. And then 7,277 inspections have been conducted, which is a 4.8% increase over FY 22. I will note that in the past 2 years, we've seen an 18.4% increase in permit activity and a 35.8% increase in inspectional services. In FY 23, we are completing our biennial permit fee review that we do to try and keep us in line with increasing costs, as well as keeping in line with other communities as far as permitting expenses. That will be forwarded to the Board of Aldermen the next few weeks. Just to give you a quick overview of how important the biennial fee review is, if you remember, that's a program we instituted in 2013. In FY 21, our expenses exceeded revenues by $115,000. That year, we completed our permit fee review, and with the support of the aldermen, they enacted our recommendations. In FY 22, our revenues exceeded expenses by $221,000, and so far in FY 23, our revenues are exceeding expenses $215,000 to date. FY 23, we will also complete our review and amend NRO, the National Revised Ordinance, Article 105, building construction, to more comply with the state's 2018 codes, that we have several amendments that we need to get approved. If you're not aware, the state of New Hampshire amended the whole process for doing local amendments, and it's a more complicated process with review through the Building Code Review Board. So we've removed quite a few of the amendments we used to have, and we've restructured some of the amendments. In FY 23, we transitioned the department to digital codes. What this does for us is that we've been able to eliminate a majority of our paper codes that you see, the thick books that hang around our office, and now all of the codes are available 24/7 to all of our inspectors through their tablets and laptops. This also provides us access to more codes and standards that we would have to pay for if we needed them. Now we get the access to them through this program. And what this also does for us is it provides for more level budgeting than the peaks and valleys that we would do every 3 years for code adoption. If you remember, years between code adoption, we'd lower that budget line item, and then a year of a code adoption, we'd have to increase it again to purchase all the code books. Now we just pay the annual fee, and we're more level. In FY 24, we proposed a part-time permit technician in the department. That, as Director Sullivan mentioned, we did end up removing that from the budget just due to the current fiscal climate. We have one position currently that is not filled. We have advertised the position, and we are accepting applications for that. That is our building inspector and assistant plans examiner. This is an extremely important position for our department in that it helps support our chief plans examiner, and it also is one of our primary inspectors in the field. To give you an idea, since we've lost that position, or since we lost that person in October, our review times for residential projects have gone to 4 weeks and beyond, which are typically 2-week review times. Our commercial review times are currently running at 6 to 8 weeks, and that's typically a 4 to 6 week review time. Inspections are now scheduled 3 to 4 days in advance, and most recently, when we had another inspector out, we were scheduling a week and a half in advance. Those are typically, all of our inspection requests, when we have a full staff, are typically honored within 24 hours. So this is an extremely important position, and I would request your support that we continue with this position. And with that, that is my brief summary, and I'll entertain any questions.
Thank you. Questions? Alderman Jettie?
Thank you. So, Mr. McKinney, with the, if I heard you correctly, you said that your submitting a schedule of fees that's gonna be an increase in fees. You're submitting that to the aldermen that we're gonna,
I wouldn't say it's an overall increase in fees. There are some areas that will be increased to better address what our actual costs are. Permit review is one of those areas. But as far as an overall fee increase, no, we are not doing that, because I don't believe, as you can see, you know, with the revenues that we're generating, we need to do an overall increase. That doesn't make sense. We need to address some of our areas in our department that we do have expenses, and I don't think we're fully covering.
Follow up?
so you say that, yet you said that you had wanted another person, but you removed that in order to comply with the mayor's directive about keeping the budget down.
Mm-hmm.
If you increase your fees, you'd be able to afford another person, wouldn't you? I mean, my understanding is that you don't have enough people to do the work you need to do, and that you could use some extra help. If you increased your fees, that would pay for that, and it wouldn't require, you know, you'd be able to get around the mayor's directive, wouldn't you?
I do agree with that.
Okay,
Did
so,
you want to add something, Mr. Director Sullivan?
I believe Alderman Jettie may still have been talking. I didn't want to interrupt.
well, I'm looking for your answer. My question is, so why don't we increase the fees to hire the people you need?
Yes, go ahead.
The short answer to that, Alderman Jettie, is that unlike some of the other departments within the city, the building safety department does not operate, it doesn't operate directly nor indirectly as an enterprise fund. The intent is not to cover expenses with revenues, and frankly, there's a lot of danger, in my opinion, in doing that. We don't operate our planning department that way. We don't operate other departments' code enforcement that way, because I would argue, and it's not the case in building safety, but it can have unexpected consequences when it comes to review, and it can unnecessarily drive permit fees up when that might not actually be justified. And so Mr. McKinney and I have spoken about this in some detail. I think we've both seen that in other communities and have seen that attempts to see that implemented. But the reality is that when creating staff positions and planning for staff, neither Mr. McKinney nor any of the other departments here do that solely in the context of the revenues that they're collecting. We really do it in the sense of, and I want to point out we're in a very pro-growth period right now. We're trying to create a stable staffing plan long-term. And so while it may be very clear today that it makes sense to bring on a staff person, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, potentially when the economy changes, there may be a need to then remove that staff position, and we really would like to avoid doing that if at all possible. Now, to Mr. McKinney's point, we certainly have a need right now, but that biennial review that fee modification has not been done, that's not in place, and so it would have been premature to explore any potential staff addition right now until that's actually approved by the Board of Aldermen. I've given you a long answer, but there are a lot of reasons why we don't simply throttle up staff capacity and numbers based on the revenues that we're collecting within our departments.
All set, Alderman Jettie?
Yeah, I guess I would just like to comment that I guess we have a different opinion. I think that you know, the building department, for example, provides a service. You know, people who are building buildings, you know, like these developers that are building these office buildings or apartment buildings, or whatever, they have to, have the buildings inspected. That enables them to do these projects and to, sell the buildings, rent the buildings, or whatever. It enables them to generate income for themselves. And, my feeling is that the city ought to be charging an appropriate fee for the service that it provides. Especially, I would think if, I haven't spoken to any of these people, so I may be completely wrong, but I think one of the complaints is that, they're not trying to shirk these inspections. they want these inspections, the sooner the better. So if it's gonna cost them a little extra money to get the inspection done so that they can get their project done, I think that they'd be more than willing to pay that. That's my opinion.
Okay. Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was looking at last year's budget and the objectives that you had laid out, and then tying them into this year's objectives. And one I had a question on, which was, excuse me, activation of customer portal and permit and inspection software to allow for online permit applications, documents, and submittal of payment fees. And then over here, for fiscal year objectives, fiscal year 24 objectives, continued implementation of electronic project and plan review process. I'm just going to assume, but my question is, how is that progressing? Did you start it in fiscal year 23, and is it proceeding nicely as planned? Kind of what's the status bar update on that?
McKinney?
How shall I say this? I think nothing in government really moves at the pace that I'd like it, but, but yes, it's a long-range plan that we have. It's been a multi-year project that we've been working on. As far as we've made the purchase of the electronic plan review table. It's a matter of working. We've had to make some adjustments in our plan review room to accommodate that. IT's been working with us on that. We're in the final stages of bringing that table online. We're also working with our IT department as far as the final steps of bringing on the portal. I'm hoping to have that within the next couple of months up and running. But again, it's a lengthy process of coordination with us, with our vendor, with the permit and inspection software, and with our IT department, so.
Okay, follow-up, please.
Follow-up?
It sounds like a great idea. Help me understand, if money set aside in the current fiscal year, money set aside in the upcoming fiscal year for this project to either continue, come to fruition, make it happen. Dollars set aside for that versus what was completed. So what I'm trying to figure out is, how much money do we put into this project? Doesn't sound like it's done yet. Is there money in this year, in the upcoming budget for that? How much is that?
All of those items were purchased when we bought the software for permitting and inspections. So it was a package that we purchased. It was paid for at that time. Now it's really just internal personnel to get it up and running.
Please.
Follow-up?
Do we know when we bought that software?
That software was purchased in 2018, and then we had a 2-year implementation. It went live in 2020, and then the last piece of it, they needed to train other departments in that software before we could put the online portal online. Those departments, I believe, are all up to speed now, and we're working with the IT department to bring our portal online.
Okay,
All set?
yes.
Any other questions? Alderman Lopez?
Well, okay, so I have a question, but I'm gonna start with a comment, I would make sure IT gets the time it needs to do it right, because I don't really wanna see everybody's property records get hacked. In reference to the earlier questioning of the Alderman Jettie had, and to the chair to Mr. McKinney, is it possible to create a tiered permitting fee structure, or would that create like an inequity? Like if you say like, okay, you can get your response in a more expedited time frame, but you have to pay 20% more. Is there a way to do that without making it like, okay, now the other people who don't have the 20% are going to be in some kind of limbo?
The answer to that would be is staffing. We do not have the staffing where we could, on a consistent basis, do expedited plan review and permitting. We would recommend someone go to third party, which that is going to be one of the amendments that you'll see in the revised ordinance, that we would have the ability to send projects out for third party review to relieve some of the stress on our office, rather than adding staff.
All set?
Yep.
Any other questions? Alderman Karen.
Thank you. So I understand what Director Sullivan said about the proposed budget, but is there anything within your budget that you wanted that was taken out that we should be aware of?
Director Sullivan?
Either one?
I think Mr. McKeon might say the same thing. I mean, I think we're having, if you can find someone to fill the existing position that's vacant within the department, that's not necessarily something you'd see in the budget, but I think above all else, that's Mr. McKinney's objective. That plans examiner position is critical in that it's both a field and an office position and is an important liaison. But I would just emphasize the fact that, you know, there was conversation about additional administrative permit technician that would assist with some of the processing tasks. And so that's something that's not included in the budget here. It's in that list of things that I think we need some time to understand the financial impacts of. And that certainly came out through the conversation with the mayor and the budget team. But I also expect that it's something you'll probably see Mr. McKinney propose again in a future year as part of his budget, because I think the demand will increase. And so that's something that was removed, but something that we need more time to understand.
Okay,
All
thank
set.
you. Thank you.
Anyone else? So I would be remiss if I didn't say that Mr. McKinney and his staff have been absolutely outstanding with our construction of our schools, making sure that their inspections are done on time, that the items they're inspecting are done to the specification and are done right, and they've been very responsive. I would say the only thing, every once in a while, like we have a plan reviewer. I can understand we have 2 new schools that we're renovating, and I think the plans are reviewed, but that's been the one thing that's been a little delayed, but I understand because of the staffing. So, but other than that, your group has been amazing with the schools, making sure that the inspections are done on time and kept our building on schedule and making sure that everything's done correctly. So thank you for that.
I thank you for those comments.
Okay, then we'll go into code enforcement.
Bless you. Bless you.
Thought somebody was shooting at us. Code enforcement.
Good evening. I'm Nelson Ortega, the Code Enforcement Manager for the city. As far as our budget is pretty much consistent as last year's, with the exception that our increase is salary. I still do have one open position, which we're actually posted on, so we're just waiting to see if we can get the right candidate in that position. We're down the one code officer. We have the officer who left, who's still helping us 15 hours a week to help us stay current with our paperwork. So we only have 2 individuals besides myself that are out in the street trying to keep up. We actively right now have 234 we have 235 active open cases at the moment. Since the last numbers were up, we've already taken in, we're up to almost 800 complaints, which due to the pandemic and so forth, the numbers have actually gone down, but the complaints are just getting more difficult and more time consuming, as some of the aldermen here know. So we're consistently looking to see if we can fill the position. It is a grant position. There's still about a little bit over a year left on that position. So hopefully we can get somebody in there to cover that. And really, I don't have much of anything new. Our work is just general maintenance. Our complaints go from a simple trash complaint to a full-blown zoning violation. So each one just has its own time frame to work on. We'll have some that we can take care of in an hour, and then we'll have some that actually takes months to work with. But the code officers, you know, they're carrying a good caseload, trying to keep up with it, and we just have to keep rolling with it.
Questions for Mr. Ortega? Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you. You mentioned You had one open position. I missed how long that position has been open.
It has been open for about 13 months now.
13 months.
Yeah.
And a comment, please?
Comment, Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you. I just wanted to say that it seems, I would imagine you're probably spending a lot of time in Ward 9. There seems to be a lot of things going on in Ward 9, so I appreciate the time that you're spending down in my little corner of the city. I appreciate it.
Thank
So,
you.
Thank you.
And that position that's been vacant is, you said it's a grant position, so it's funded by a grant?
It's under the lead program.
Okay. Just
Yeah,
for
lead program.
clarification. Question, Alderman Jettie?
So if that position were filled, do you feel that you can handle, I mean, I know that I've relayed complaints to you and, you know, I think your office has been very responsive, but sometimes I get, you know, a little bit of a pushback saying, you know, you've only got so many people. So if that position were filled, do you have enough people to do your job?
With the case numbers and the caseload that we have presently, if the position were filled, we'd be in pretty good shape.
Okay. And,
Follow up, Alderman Jettie?
so when someone violates the code, when you find that someone is, then there's a fine that goes along with that, isn't there? And I don't see any revenue in here, so where does that fine go?
Our fine system is set up, it is not set up as a revenue generating source. It is there for us to use as a tool when we have non-compliance. So we have the option of giving the individual a fine first, after, if they're totally ignoring us, and just, if they're working with us, we will always work with someone who works with us. If they don't, we have the option of giving them a ticket, which is the fine, or taking it to district court. We've done both. But we do not regularly give off citations because most of the time people do work with us.
I think Alderman Jettie was saying, where does the revenue go from the fines? And I think it goes into the general fund.
I believe so.
I would like to confirm this, but my understanding is that ticketing in the context of code enforcement does actually go to the general fund. It does not have a dedicated revenue account receiver within the community development nor in the code enforcement budget. It goes to the general fund at large. And I can't speak to that number historically, but to Mr. Ortega's point, you know, fines are certainly the last remedy. Compliance is our primary objective. There have been some situations where we've had fines, but they've been limited, and I think they go to the general fund, but I can certainly confirm that too.
Okay, thank you.
That's it. Any other questions for Mr. Ortega? Seeing none, we'll go on to hydroelectric operations.
Hi, good evening, Deb Chisholm. I'm the, well, I guess when I talk about hydroelectric operations, I'm the waterways manager. Also wear the sustainability hat. We'll save that one for later. You can see, and we've discussed this in the past, the hydroelectric operations are a fairly significant revenue source for the city. You can see in your packet the revenue is going to be, we're anticipating the revenues to be a little bit less in fiscal year '24. The hydro facility at the Jackson Mills site is undergoing a major equipment replacement finally now in this summer. It should have happened 2 years ago, and we had some hiccups with our extensive permitting process with the federal agencies. But we are back on track and we are ready to go. We are hopeful to actually get started next month. So keep your eyes peeled for giant cranes and lots of heavy equipment and dump trucks around the BAE facilities parking lot, Margaritas. You know, feel free to go to Margaritas and hang out down there. You'll have a really good view of, not that I'm gonna be doing that.
Twist my arm.
I actually have a little spot at the library. I think I'll be sitting at to check out the work that's going on. So for this upcoming fiscal year, that project will start in June. Will be installing a cofferdam in the water at least by July 1st. And at that point, that facility will not be operational until probably April. So that's really where the revenue decline will be. We're hopeful that Mine Falls will keep plugging away, knock on wood, as the equipment there is just as old as the stuff we're pulling out of Jackson Mills. So we're hopeful that those 2 turbines at Mine Falls will continue operating. I will say that we had a bit of an increase in our budget, and Director Sullivan spoke to it during his opening comments relative to we've got increases that are fairly typical. We've got, actually, it seems ironic, but we've got increased electricity costs that are required to operate both of those facilities. And we have porta potties and we have trash pickup. And those have some fairly standard increases every year. Our major increase this year is for, we have a new contract with our existing contractor, Essex Hydro, who, by the way, has done a fantastic job of operating that facility. I don't want people to think that I have any idea how to operate either of those facilities. We hire a contractor and they're really great. As a matter of fact, the woman who was in my position as waterways manager originally, Madeline Minot, actually works for Essex Hydro now. So we really couldn't have better help as far as operating both of those facilities. She's been really, really helpful. But we have a new contract with them, and that really is what you're going to see here in the increase in the appropriations in the property services. That's essentially the increase. We pay Essex Hydro a quarterly administrative services amount, and that amount is based purely on revenue. It's a little bit challenging to try to anticipate what that cost is going to be, as challenging as it is to try to figure out what our revenues are going to be. So we're hopeful that what we've got here in front of you is exactly what we're looking at. We will have, again, the decreased revenues. However, in our new contract with Essex Hydro, we have a 5% increase in what we actually pay them each quarter. And so, depending on the revenue, we have in the past, we've paid them, fairly extensive checks, but those are to cover the administrative services. So when I call her on the phone, they don't charge me extra for that. It comes out of their administrative services fund amount that we pay them every quarter. So really that's the chunk of it right there. We are hopeful that we don't have a lot of major expenses when it comes to operation and maintenance. That's essentially what this general fund budget is for. If we have some other additional equipment failure or repairs that need to be made, we typically look to our escrow account for those funds. And any of the funds that we have, the bond amounts are used for the equipment upgrade at Jackson Mills and any of the changes that need to be made as part of the relicensing process of the Mine Falls facility, which hopefully will be coming to an end soon.
Questions from Ms. Chisholm? Alderman Sullivan.
Thank you. I'm trying to understand the revenue line. Adopted budget, 1.178 million. Year to date, that the hydroelectric has generated, from what I understand, $821,000.
Right, as
Again.
of March 31st.
Correct.
So at this point, we've generated $1.27 million as of last week. So
Spring is very strong for us.
1.27 million.
Right, yep. Sorry.
In just the last
Oh, it's up
month.
there.
It's up on the
Yep.
big chart.
Okay, I didn't read that line. Well, that's great, nice comeback.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So help me understand available budget, 778,000, is that what is that number? What is that?
That's a good question. I didn't put the number together.
Where are you looking at?
If you look at revenue, you see the adopted budget, and then next to it, it says fiscal year '23 available budget. And then the next column over, year-to-date as of 3/31. I understand the first one and the third one. I don't understand the middle one.
That's an excellent question. I also do not understand the middle one.
Okay.
I think available budget,
I thought it would be the difference, but it's not.
yeah, you can see in this instance, it doesn't make sense.
Mr. Griffin, if you're out there.
Can I just point out that if the third one is as of 3/31, it's not the complete picture, so it might be the difference.
Yeah, we'll put that question out to Director Griffin, Treasurer Griffin. I'm sure he's listening, so either he or Cheryl, one of the two, we'll get an answer to that.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Good, thanks.
Alderman Lopez.
With regards to the comments about updating Mine Falls, I realize that it's like an antique, literally, but didn't we just replace the turbine, send one back, get it refurbished, and then bring it back?
We have made repairs on, I think, Unit 1 had some replacement work done 2 years ago. Fairly extensive, yes. So
I mean, it wasn't there, like they took it out.
Well, exactly. So hopefully that, at a minimum, will help keep that facility up and running. And it may be that Unit 2 is the one that gets replaced first, but we are trying to be somewhat proactive about that. I certainly don't want to run those until they're broken, because then we'll be down for 2 years, if that's the case. But yes, you're correct, that one did it was pre-COVID, for sure. 2019, I think, the crane was out there pulling that thing out. Yeah.
With regards,
Follow it?
with regards to budget items and operation, is there any need for like information security in that area? Is it electronic?
The facility, both of the facilities, we do have outdoor cameras that are running 24/7. We did catch some kids running where they shouldn't have been running at one point. Thanks to the cameras, we were able to see that. We also, we've had a couple of break-ins in the equipment shed at Jackson Mills. We are hopeful that with the upgrades to the equipment, we will also be upgrading some of the locks on those facility doors to make sure that we're staying at least somewhat safer than where we're at right now.
But nobody can hack it and like change the water level or anything, right?
I'm not going to say nobody could. I mean, it's surprising to me what people can do these days. Essex Hydro does have remote access to all of that operation of both of those facilities. So, but you do bring up a good point, something that we should probably be discussing internally to figure out if there are some other additional measures that could be done.
I like kayaking, just not to work.
All set? Alderman Jettie?
So is the Jackson Falls, is that operating now?
Yes, it is. Yep.
Okay.
But it's gonna be going down as soon as you start the replacement.
It will. We are continuing to operate that facility through the fish passage season, which typically ends around the beginning of June. And then once that fish passage season is done, then we'll shut the facility down and start installing the cofferdam.
Okay, so,
Follow up?
so this new thing that is that gonna be replacing what's there or adding to it?
It's a complete overhaul of the equipment out there. The turbine, the generator, and all the controls are being replaced.
Okay. So it's not gonna double the revenue because it's,
It is the same size. It's a 1 megawatt turbine, The idea would be that that thing is going to be running 24/7 as often as it can, and will be much more reliable. We've had several weeks where Jackson Mills has been down for repairs. We've been stringing it along now for the last couple of months, hoping that we can keep it running until the very last minute, but, yeah.
You'll recall that the turbine that we're talking about was being held in Europe. We had to authorize the money to get it here, and now it's here, I assume.
It's not here just yet.
Not yet.
It's en route.
We're about to,
It's not even en route yet. We don't want it to be here until ultimately, I would love to take it off of the truck that it came in and put it right in the powerhouse. But I don't think that's going to happen. But we don't want that equipment to be sitting out in the parking lot too long
Right.
because of the maintenance that's required. We've got to measure a lot of different items to make sure that there's no condensation in the metal works, et cetera.
And the design of this turbine is more modular than the previous one and can be repaired easier, faster. And I think we also authorize spares in case it does go down. Are those being delivered at the same time?
Correct, yes.
Okay. So it'll be far more reliable and will ultimately produce more revenue because it will be running more than the previous one. Not because it, no, it doesn't make more but because it's running more. Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you. I had, going back to the revenues, it looks like if you take Jackson Falls offline for what looks to be much of the year, I'm thinking that it looks to me as though Mine Falls generates about 75 cents out of every dollar that we get.
That's correct.
Okay,
Yep.
okay.
Yeah, there are 2 turbines over there, and that's a 3 megawatt facility. So it definitely is it's the workhorse of the 2 facilities.
And, I'm sorry.
So, but what we'll end up with next year is we may end up with 2 or 3 months of revenue for Jackson.
Okay,
Fingers crossed.
okay. One more, please.
Follow-up question?
With the improvements on Jackson Falls, do you feel that'll even it out, or do you think it'll still be 75-25 in favor of Mill Falls?
I think we'll get additional revenue out of Jackson because it's a new turbine, and it should run more efficiently, it should run more often, but it is not a 3 megawatt, it's a 1 megawatt turbine, so
Sure.
it can only produce so much.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Alderman Jettie?
Yeah, so Chairman Dowd's question triggered this question in my mind. So this new turbine, is it still in Europe? Is it on the ocean? Is it stateside? Where is it?
It is sitting in at the facility where it was manufactured in the Czech Republic.
So it's still there, it's
It
still
is
in
still
Europe?
there. It typically, I've been told from the manufacturer that it typically takes between 6 and 8 weeks for transport, but they plan for 3 months in case something happens. So we're anticipating that equipment will be shipped at the beginning of July and will get here. We're hoping it gets here in October, but it will probably get here, in August, and then we'll have to accommodate having that equipment out there and make sure that it stays safe.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All set? Any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Chisholm.
You're welcome.
Next is community development.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Matt Sullivan, Community Development Director. I think this is the night of the year where I kind of ask, what is it that I do here? And I'm not sure if I know the answer sometimes when I have all the departments here talking about the work that they're doing. But from a budgetary perspective, very minimal modifications to the Community Development Division or Department of the Division budget heading into FY 2024. The one change I would review for the committee is that $60,000 have been pivoted into this operational budget with the intent to use those monies for the Your Voice, Your Choice program next year. There's an active conversation happening around that program right now about some potential rotating of the geography of focus. As many of you may remember, and certainly Alderman Lopez knows very, very well, typically these monies have been through the participatory budgeting process in the Tree Streets neighborhood here in the city. There's been some conversation about now moving those monies around to other vulnerable populations and neighborhoods, potentially Crown Hill area. Some other neighborhoods have been discussed. But we look forward to 2024 and the implementation of an additional $60,000 of construction money or some other investment into one of those communities, and hopefully mirroring the success of that program that we've had in the past. Just as a note, because I expect this question may be asked, you may recall last year we've had some delays on implementing this funding. We're currently in the process of doing two improvements. One is a substantial upgrade to the lighting at the futsal court and skate park at the near the Los Amigos Park, right on Ash Street. And then what we'll be doing in the fall is actually redoing the Los Amigos playground in full. We have one remaining design component that we have to work through, but we're very excited to be really putting 2.5 years of money into a complete redo of the recreational facilities along the Ash Street corridor. And so we're very, very excited about that. Again, look in July to see some lighting work underway, and then later this fall to actually see the playground proper being reconstructed. And we're working very closely with the Parks and Recreation Department to do that. So just wanted to point out where that program's at as of today. To point out a few highlights coming up this year, recognizing that predominantly this budget is a personnel, wages and benefits budget. A few things that we're working on that you're well aware of, obviously, is the Mohawk Tannery project, the Library Plaza reconstruction, which I've shown a summary photo of here. Certainly some transportation work in the downtown, Main Street, East Hall Street corridor, along the DW Highway. We have several transportation projects ongoing right now, including a downtown circulation study overhaul that we're working on collaboratively with several departments. Also working closely with housing. I know with certainly some folks around this table that are involved in the housing conversation, working in the Housing Trust Fund realm, Housing Trust Fund Committee, to actually get those monies out the door and into the community. Hoping to work closely over the next year to come back to you and talk about some of the success of that work and the $10 million of ARPA funding that we're put into the Housing Trust Fund. And then lastly, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we're hoping to go under construction for the Heritage Rail Trail East project in the coming year. This is an extension of the rail trail out to the Henry Hangar site generally, East Hall Street corridor, and looking forward to bringing that construction forward and into fruition based on a lot of the investment that we're seeing happen along that corridor. Some good, some questionable, but nonetheless, we're very excited to be doing that work moving forward. Beyond that, I'd be happy to speak to any of the goals or accomplishments that were presented within the budget. As you'll see, a lot of those are stolen from the wonderful members of my team that work for me, but I would like to just thank them for all of the work that they're doing, and I'm just happy to be a part of a lot of the projects going on across the division generally.
Questions for Director Sullivan? Alderman Sullivan.
Thank you. Okay. So I'm just going bottom line here.
Mm-hmm.
Your adopted budget was 409,000 in fiscal year 23. Your proposed budget is lower at 365,399. That is absolutely cannot happen. I don't understand how that's happening.
What page you on?
The summary page.
Yeah, I'm just following, I've got it online.
Alderman Sullivan, I do not believe that total, I'm just looking at the numbers quickly and I can do the math as we sit here. I do not believe that 365 includes the increase of $60,000, and I'll do that math right now on my phone.
Yeah.
And I can't speak directly to why that is, but I believe that might be the deficiency there.
Okay.
It's in there. That 60,000 is in there that you talked about.
I do see it in there, but I think what he's saying is it's not reflected in the
I don't
total.
believe
It
it's
mustn't have
reflected in the
carried
total.
through to the total.
Another question for Treasurer.
So are you,
It does appear to carry through, so Alderman Sullivan, I'll take a look at this while we're going through the presentation, and I can certainly try and find the discrepancy and come back.
okay, just one follow-up too,
Follow-up.
please. Under, you mentioned some capital improvements that you were gonna make. you have there's an available budget, I don't wanna say you, your department has an available budget of 1.88 million in there. So that's the money, you're gonna use those monies towards those capital improvements?
Yes,
Sure.
Director Sullivan?
That's a great question, and it's sort of interesting the way that the budget was presented this year, so I'm happy you asked this question, because admittedly, when I saw that number, I thought, wow, I've got
Let's
some
go.
cash somewhere that is really good to have. What that represents is several years of capital outlays and improvements that have been requested, that are either encumbered or are currently being executed. And to give you an example of that, this board acted to allocate $1.5 million of ARPA funding to the Library Plaza project. Those monies were put in the community development bin, if you will, for capital improvements. And so that $1.5 million is actually reflected in that capital outlay / improvement line. Community development is carrying those monies, but the intent is to use them, and they've been dedicated to the library project because I'm responsible for the Library Plaza project myself. Similarly, we have several components of match funding for DOT transportation projects that were allocated in prior years. Those have been put into the community development bin because I'm responsible for managing those projects. So that capital outlay line represents several incremental capital investments that have been made that have either been spent or will be spent over the coming years. Hopefully that answers your question, because it's a little bit interesting the way it's presented here.
Could I have a follow-up, please? I would love to see, for that specific line item, capital outlay / improvements, a detailing of what, great narrative that you put together. However, I would love to see inflow, outflow, pending, all of that. That's a big chunk of money. And I would just love to know, and I think it would be good for the public to see as well, what's in that? And, what we'll get for that money, what is slated to be improved on that? And I think our process is to send it through
Yes.
Donna
We're
Graham.
just gonna tell
Okay.
Director Sullivan if you would provide that answer through Donna Graham so the entire board can get a copy of the
Yeah,
answer.
I'd be happy to, and I think, to Alderman Sullivan's point, they're all projects that have been discussed, but with different iterations of the board and at different points in time, and so I think it's good to circle all of that up into one comprehensive list of projects. Yeah, I'd be happy to provide that. It's a
appreciate
really good
it.
question. Yeah, absolutely.
Any other, yes, Alderman Lopez?
With regards to the shift in the your choice, your voice focus, how's that decision being made and how's it being communicated to the public?
Yes.
Alderman Lopez, that's a great question. I even feel premature mentioning that potential shift this evening because the decision has very much not been made. I mean only to represent that the decision has not been made to direct those funds to the tree streets at this point in time. That's a conversation that's actively happening between myself, certainly the mayor, Megan Karen in the mayor's office, and it will be communicated with the appropriate aldermen as well when that decision is ultimately made, and I expect that some aldermen will be involved in that decision-making process. Relative to how it will be communicated in finality, I can certainly put together a communication for the Board of Aldermen, but there'll be many, many touches along the way to make sure that everyone's aware of where those monies are going.
Well, ultimately, I think the responsibility for the oversight and justification is in your office. I think it would be important to the fundamental concept of participatory budgeting to tell the neighborhoods that had sort of gotten used to it, but haven't really seen anything in the last year or two about this, that, hey, now we're letting another neighborhood participate. And that way that neighborhood doesn't feel like, okay, we're participating as long as they let us.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Okay, any other questions from Director Sullivan? Yes, Alderman Jettie?
Yeah, so Director Sullivan, in your preliminary remarks, you talked about there being, I think you said 4 vacant positions. So I know that Mr. Ortega has a vacant position, and I'm not sure if Mr. McKinney does too. So what are the other 2?
So
Yeah,
Mr. Chair, so
correct.
Alderman Jay, there's
Correct.
one confirmed vacancy in addition to that one, and that is actually the sustainability planner within Ms. Chisholm's Sustainability Department that she'll talk about in just a few minutes. That was previously held by Julie Chismus, but the position was actually transferred out of the community development budget into the sustainability budget as part of the last year's fiscal process. That position has remained open for some period of time, and we can speak to that in a few minutes. Deb's done very well without it, but certainly one that we need moving forward. The fourth position is actually one that we may have within the transit department, yet to be confirmed as of this moment, but we may have a vacancy that needs to be filled there as well.
All
Thank
set, Alderman Jettie?
Thank you.
If there are no other questions for that, we'll go into planning and zoning.
Good evening, Chairman Dow, and members of the committee. I'm Sam Durfee, the planning manager for the city of Nashua. To briefly touch on budgetary changes, this is primarily a salary and wage and benefit increase,
You gotta get closer to the microphone so it picks it up.
as well as a slight dues increase for the Nashua Regional Planning Commission, who we are an active partner with. In speaking with our revenue, we, to this date, we have already exceeded our target from last year. That is primarily due to some large projects, in particular the Mohawk Tannery project. And as the conversation has already occurred regarding fees, this is definitely reflective of I think, a good fee schedule for the sort of development that we are seeing. It's consistent and competitive with other communities. And I think as we see the type of development that is occurring in cities like Nashua built out, the redevelopment, these do require large projects to be profitable. And I think that's a trend that we're going to continue to see, especially as we hope to overhaul our land use code and generate such projects like those. We are trending a little lower in our planning and zoning board applications. I think that is, again, to that continuing trend of the different types of projects we're seeing. We are no longer seeing, these multiple subdivision applications. We are running out of land. And again, the larger housing infill and redevelopment projects, like you see up on the screen, this is at 249 Main Street, vacant lot on Main Street, 45 affordable units that is currently under construction now. That is the type of projects that we will see primarily and will be a substantial part of our land use application budget and revenue line item. I do not have too much to add in terms of comments on our revenue and appropriations. However, I'd be happy to speak to some of our objectives for next year and some of the work we've done so far in fiscal year 23.
Okay, any questions, Mr. Durfee? No? You get off easy. Oh, Alderman Jettie?
So, Mr. Durfee, do you feel that you have the staff that you need to do the job?
Yes, go ahead.
I certainly do. We are sufficiently staffed to carry out the duties and the tasks that we typically see in a typical year. I will state that with this incoming code update, it will be a more intense workload than we have seen in the past. This is a legacy project that comes around every 20 years or so. But we have been speaking nearly weekly with our staff about it, how we're going to approach the project. We are hiring a consultant, and we feel confident that we will be able to balance our current workload as well as undertake this code update.
All set.
Thank you.
So you have had some pretty large crowds at some of your meetings lately, but we all know what that's about, so. All set? You have a question for him?
I just have
Director
a comment
Sullivan?
subsequent to Mr. Durfee. Just going back to, because I want to close this loop, to Alderman Sullivan's question on my budget. The reason for that reduction is in fact that there was $120,000, and if you look back at our budget sheets in community development, $120,000 were allocated to capital outlay in FY 2023, and that was for the match for two projects, the Spruce Street Connector and the Railroad Square reconfiguration. And so that increased the budget up to $409,000. With that removed, That brings us down to, if I'm not mistaken, if I can find my notes that I just took. It essentially ends up being such that it's a much more minor modification and increase from FY '23 to 2024. I believe it brings the budget down to 289,171 in FY 2023. Does that
Yep.
answer your question?
All set?
May I?
Yes.
So I just did this. So if I do 409,171, subtract out 120. That leaves me 289,171, I believe you said that.
Correct.
And then if I add in the 60,000 for the, that's for your choice, your voice. That's 349,171, and then the balance are made up through the line items preceding that.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
That's it?
Thanks for doing that.
Yeah, well, it was fairly obvious and I just missed it. So
Okay.
that's the risk of including those capital outlays. It can sort of throttle up and down the operational budget lines when it's really not, it's a capital expense.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, we'll move on to sustainability.
Hi, good evening, Deb Chisholm, Sustainability Manager. Fairly straightforward budget this year for sustainability. Last year was our first year of existence. And we don't really have a lot of changes. We've got standard increases due to salaries. To go back to the issue with staff, currently Sustainability Department is me and Doria Brown, who you've met several times. She's the energy manager. She and I have been lifting a heavy load in our department, and we've got a job posting out there. We've posted it now twice. We may have a couple of candidates currently in the queue that may be somewhat qualified, but it's kind of a niche position that we're looking to fill. So it's been a bit challenging to find just the right person. So we're hopeful, actually. We've got fingers crossed that we've got maybe some potential candidates that we could get on board fairly soon. That's really, all of our other costs are really standard. We've got a little bit of an increase in our contracted services to cover the aquatic invasive species management that we do every year on the Nashua River. That line item also covers our payment to Kim Lundgren Associates. They are the ones who are responsible for updating and maintaining the Livable Nashua dashboard, which is a really great resource. If you don't already know, it's livablonashuadashboard.org. Feel free to check it out. A little advertising there. That's about all we have. I do want to say that, again, with just Doria and myself, Doria has been really, this past year, has spent 110% of her effort has been on community power and getting that up and running. And so far, so good. Appreciate your involvement with that. So that's been really a huge lift for her to get the city to be playing such a major role in that whole program. So I just want to give a little kudos to her and all the work she's done on that.
Questions? You had a $9,000 training budget requested last year, got cut basically in half. And now you have the 9,000 in again. It's just the two of you, who's being trained?
Well, the idea is to have the money in there for three of us.
Okay.
And it would be for training, it would be for conferences. Dory and I are just kind of coming out of the whole COVID thing and just trying to figure out exactly where we can go, what we can do. With only two of us actually doing any of the work right now, we are really, we're very shorthanded without that third person. So the idea of even now, Dory's going off and getting herself married and gonna be out on her honeymoon, and I'm like, oh geez, okay, what's gonna happen? So, yeah.
All right. Any questions? Okay. Seeing none, we'll go on to urban programs.
Mr. Chair, just briefly, we won't be discussing.
That's right. Those are the
I just
grant-
wanted to
yeah,
be,
no
yep,
problem.
I'm sorry, happy to answer any questions that folks have offline about that
Yeah.
department. It's kind of a shame not to talk about it in detail tonight because we're doing a lot of great work, but hopefully we can go into civic and community activities.
Civics and community activities.
Good evening, Julian Long, Urban Programs Manager. And I oversaw the process for allocating grants under our Community Development Block Grant Program, and also was the staff liaison to the Citizens Advisory Commission as they met and reviewed grants through the mayor's office. And I'm happy to answer any questions about any of those.
Questions?
What page would I find this?
39?
Say that again?
39?
39.
Are you
Right-
liaison to that?
Right
You
after the
liaison?
legal department, that can't be good.
Well,
Says the lawyer.
on my page 39, civic and community activities.
Right, I was just pointing out that it comes right after the legal
Oh,
department.
oh, oh, oh. Where it ended up in the book is,
Trying to figure out where it is on the website.
yeah, they're not sequential the way they line up in our reviews.
It's under, if I may, well, online, it's under general government, and then like you said, it's under legal. I don't know where it ties in on the pages, but, yeah,
It's half the legal, but not part of legal.
it's in general government.
So who is our liaison to that group?
To the group that makes these decisions.
Yeah, yeah. Are you talking about the stuff through Human Affairs Committee?
What?
Yeah.
The community stuff?
Appropriations.
Are you pointing to us?
So you
So-
say liaison, but you mean staff?
Well, I thought we,
So, Mr. Chair, the civic and community activities budget is a bit of an odd one, and I think that's because and that's evidenced by the fact that where it's housed in the budget book and the online budget book is a bit out of place. As you'll see when you open up the budget for civic and community activities, it includes some appropriations that are actually under the mayor's office and some other appropriations that are actually under the purview of the Citizens Advisory Committee. Mr. Long is the liaison and the staff to the Citizen Advisory Committee and supports their activities and has been an active part of that process as his predecessor, Carrie Skino, was. But it's always an interesting one for us to present because, again, some of these lines we can't speak directly to, but we can certainly try as best as we can to answer the questions. But it's actually multiple departments involved with this budget and its creation.
yep. Alderman Karen?
Yes. I certainly can speak on this because I sat on this board for,
Wow, it's just not getting better over there.
Yeah.
Just turn it off.
All right, where were we? Alderman Karen.
yes. Before I became an alderman, I sat on the CAC committee, and I will tell you, and I said this before, that this group of citizens throughout the community who have to review approximately 30 applications for the funding, and they never know exactly how much they get till late. They work very hard. They look at the demographics, they look at the reports that they get to appropriate the money the best way they can. And over the years, well, if you're gonna have a volunteer group make decisions for you and you go back and change it because you don't like it, doesn't help the process. But over the years that has never happened. We've all agreed that the decisions they have made are the right ones. And I really have to tell you, Mr. Long, that I appreciated the work that you did with this group this year and also with the CBG money, because you did talk through some of these agencies that didn't know that they could apply for these projects. So that really helps our community. What little we give, no matter if it's $10,000 or $50,000, it benefits that nonprofit agency that we have within our community. So we could certainly ask questions as to what that money is going for, but unless you have your whole list, you could get a little confused with the process. But I just have to say that they have done a great job, and I hope you continue to be able to do that, and you have the people working with you to provide the monies in the best way possible, because it is a bit of federal money as well as general funding. So then that's a good thing.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the kind words. I thought it might be helpful if I just said a few words about what is this money, where does it come from? I'll start with Citizens Advisory Commission. First of all, I want to echo the remarks. Working with them, I found them to be a very dedicated, hardworking group, and we're very lucky to have all of them. And so that money, it starts with the mayor's office. The mayor's office provides us the budget for how much money is available for grants. And the Citizens Advisory Commission, all appointed folks, including Alderwoman Timmons, met on a weekly basis from January through March, reviewing those grant applications in great depth. They had a ranking system to help guide that process based on demonstrated community need, the agency's capacity to meet that need, and the agency's needs specifically for city funding. And to the best of my understanding, these are general municipal funds that are used for Citizens Advisory Commission. The city is also fortunate to have the Community Development Block Grant. That is federal money. That's through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and we don't have to request that money. We're what they call an entitlement community. We receive it every year, and that's based on a formula. So in both cases, we had a finite amount of funds that was not up to us. We were given a number, and we worked within that number. On the CDBG side of the house, those grant applications went through the Human Affairs Committee, which asked the applicants to present in person and had a few meetings of discussion and deliberation.
Questions, Alderman Jettie?
Thank you. I would, before I was an alderman, I, served on various boards of nonprofit agencies, and I was, coming to the committee, with my hand out begging for money. So I know how much time they spend. They do a wonderful job, and I have no quarrel with the decisions they made. I did have a question about, of the approximately 800,000 that's given to the local nonprofits. You mentioned part of that was community development block grant money, which is federal money, and part of it was city money. How much is federal and how much is city?
For the Citizens Advisory Commission grants, which is our municipal funding side, that number was $557,270. And for the Community Development Block Grant, which is the federal money, that number was $624,308.
Okay, so that adds up to over $1 million, but you only gave out less than 791,000.
A portion of the CDBG funds goes towards administrative costs, primarily staff and salary and benefits.
Okay.
All set? Oh. Alderman Lopez?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on my confusion earlier. I wasn't sure what was being asked, but so I was the liaison for the Citizens Advisory Commission last year, but I had switched place with Alderman Timmons, particularly because I found the roles were very similar to the CDBG. and I also chair the Human Affairs Committee. But I would say also because they're very, very rigorous in their assessment, I would argue that they're probably, as a small group, more rigorous than even this board is, in that they very closely review all of the financials, all the proposals, the histories of applications, of performance by the agencies, and all that kind of stuff. And then they rank it multiple times. Like they rank each individual one itself. They overall use that scoring system to decide how funding is to be allocated, but then they review that decision too to make sure that it's well done. So to echo Alderman Karen's comments, it's a very, very well run process of vetting and thoroughly examining the different applications. I would comment for members of the public, sometimes that can be confusing too. I recall a couple of years ago at the budget hearing, the public budget hearing, we had a member of the public who was actually a former alderman come up and ask why we defunded the Girl Scouts. And we didn't. The Girl Scouts didn't apply for money. So in looking at the CAC expenses in budget the previous year, it looked like there was no money awarded, but that was not because anything was removed. It was because they didn't ask for it. And there are a number of circumstances here where because an organization engages with the CAC, they become aware of more options. Julian's department helps them connect with other possible resources and avenues for that. And then something similar happens with CDBG, where often a conversation can be started with a request for money, but it doesn't have to end there, and more often doesn't. Nashua leverages its nonprofits a lot. So while it could be said that the CAC and CDBGs benefit them in that they're an organization that is designed not to make money, it benefits all of us very, very much, because the work that they're doing are things that would cost the taxpayers considerably more. And, for the cost of helping winterize some windows for an orphanage or provide handicap accessibility, helping them address incidental expenses that might overall be outside their range and limit their services, the city gets a lot out of that. So I think this is an example of a very effectively vetted and very well leveraged use of resources.
Thank you. Alderman Sullivan, did you?
Thank you. A question for Director Sullivan, more of a comment. Just so you know, and maybe you knew this, but civic and community activities, since we couldn't find it in the book, it doesn't sit under your department. Thus, it's not factored into the budget lift that you talked about.
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct, and I should have been clear about that when we started. Admittedly, we had this conversation last year as well, and I think moving forward, it may actually be pulled out of the presentation this evening.
Mm-hmm.
But because of Julian's involvement, we've naturally presented on it. But you're absolutely correct, Alderman Sullivan, that is not included in those figures that I presented at the beginning, the 8.1 and the 3.8.
Okay.
Correct.
I just wanted to
Yep, no, that's a
double
great
check on
clarification.
that. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I think it was more, they spent so much time formatting this new book that they didn't get these shifts around, so give them a pass this year. Next is transportation.
Good evening, Chairman Dowd and members of the committee. My name is Camille Correa, the Transit Administrator for Nashua Transit System. The budget grant is funded, or the budget is grant funded by the Federal Transit Administration and some other organizations such as the New Hampshire DOT for matches to leverage federal grants, revenue contracts, and also the City of Nashua match. The 2024 budget changes have an increase of 3% through the City of Nashua local allocation. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have in regards to our objectives or accomplishments as outlined in the budget information presented.
Questions? Alderman Jettie.
Yeah, so I know you've been having trouble finding enough drivers. So does this budget take that into consideration? I assume to get drivers, you're gonna have to pay more money. Is that?
I'd be happy
Director
to.
Sullivan presented the information.
Yeah,
And so.
I'd be happy to respond to that. And I wish I could simply respond by saying transit is very complicated, but that's not a good response. And so As everyone is aware, we recently saw a substantial modification to the city's contract with First Transit. First Transit and now First Transit / TransDev is the provider for the city of Nashua and has been for a long period of time. I represented figures as part of that contract presentation, and we ultimately agreed to sort of an hourly rate increase for First Transit services moving forward through the term of the contract that will expire June 30th of 2024. So there's about a year and some change remaining on that contract. Right now, we're in the process of working with First Transit to hire drivers. I can report carefully that we're seeing some very positive results. We're beginning to have discussions about route restoration that you'll hear about at Transit Matters and as part of other conversations. We expect to bring certain routes back over the next month and a half. We had to have a substantial restoration of services. So we're happy to report that in this case, throwing more money at the problem actually mattered based on our market study and based on what we were hearing from our drivers and the gap that existed there. So that's the good news. The unknown news is when I presented that contract increase, I was very clear about the fact that we did not know, for a variety of reasons, whether or not, let's say, an increase of $500,000 would require a $500,000 additional increase on behalf, or additional contribution on behalf of the city. There are a variety of factors that make it so that whatever our contract increase and whatever we're paying the drivers do not equate to a dollar on the dollar increase to the city's allocation to the system. So I'm maybe getting into the weeds already, but basically, because we're offering diminished routes, our costs are lower, we're paying drivers more, but we're not certain exactly how many of our routes we're going to be able to restore over the next year and some change. We did not take an aggressive approach with this year's budget to increase the local allocation to the transit system, that being the $441,000 that's proposed within the budget before you. What I said, I think I said fairly clearly at the Finance Committee and Board of Aldermen is that over the next years, we understand more fully what our full route offerings look like across the community and the costs of offering those routes. I expect that as part of the FY 2025 budgeting process, you are going to see a more substantial request for an increase from the city's allocation. So you may see that number move from 441 up to 550, 575. The reason we can't do that today is because we simply don't know what that gap will be until we see how the services are offered over the coming period of time, or the coming year. What I can say with confidence, though, is that we believe we have, and we feel very, very, very confident that we have enough funding in place right now to operate the service for the term of that contract and the term of the FY 2024 fiscal year. Beyond that, we're going to be having a conversation with this group about a potential modification to the local allocation as we understand how all those numbers work together. So it's a bit of a, we don't know at this point in time, but we aren't comfortable enough to take a plunge in asking for substantially more funds from the city until we know how everything plays out.
Well said, Alderman Jenny.
Yes, thank you. Well, I appreciate I always appreciate the I don't know answer, as opposed to the I pretend to know answer. So I know it's difficult because, we went through COVID and then we've had, trouble maintaining the routes because of lack of drivers. So it's a difficult thing to assess, but, do you have a feeling about the demand? Is there enough of a demand for the transportation system? Are there a lot of people trying to use it? Are there a lot of people using it? And do you think there'd be more people using it if we had more routes? I've said this, during the Transit Matters meetings. I think that in order to be successful, a bus system has to be dependable. People have to know that, you put out a schedule and that the bus is going to be at their stop at a certain time and that they can depend on it to get to work on time or to get to a doctor's appointment or whatever. And this, because of, for first because of COVID and then because of the driver shortage, you know, routes being constantly canceled, rerouted or detoured. You know, it's really, I imagine that's really caused havoc in the transit system. I'd be interested in what your take is on all of that.
A lot of what you mentioned are the common variables in transit every day, especially during the summer. The summer months bring on pop-up construction, constant detours, delays with the light systems at certain times of the day when school gets out, or traffic from the school system. And coming out of post-COVID, there's a lot more traffic on Amherst Street, in downtown, and in the south than we had during COVID. Some of these routes were put together right in the beginning, right before COVID hit, under the auspices of the traffic would remain the same, but indeed we've seen that the traffic has increased over time. What we try to do is mitigate or try to plan ahead, and we're working diligently with the engineering department to find out when those detours are going to take place so that we can let people know. Sometimes we don't know if a gas company has a line that has to be dug up or a main water line that's burst in the middle of winter. And so we try our best to get that information out. One thing we do know that electronics nowadays and social media is our friend, to try to communicate with people as much as possible for those that do have a phone. And in the future, I've mentioned it before, and we are moving forward with our technology grant for real-time bus information for our customers that do have those electronic devices or those options to be able to get real-time information. For those people who still want to use the old school, pick up the phone and speak to someone on the phone and ask a question, we will have that available for people to be able to call as well. And to answer your question, there are always many variables that are involved, and we do try to mitigate as much as possible. And we have had several challenges since I've been here in the last 2 years, and there were some challenges before I came, which every single transit system in the United States was impacted by, and that was COVID. And during that time frame, we've all been challenged by everything that we've had to go through, and every single department has had those challenges, and so has the city, with wearing masks and delays or not having as many people to speak to, or people getting sick, or, you know, all the things that were involved. And so thank you for asking the questions, those hard questions, because the question is, why are the routes delayed? Why are they impacted? And every day we try to mitigate the detours, the people who are throwing up on the bus because they get on because they didn't take their medicine properly and they got sick on the bus, and so we have to switch out a bus, or a bus may go down or have a flat tire, and so we do our best to do that. And there are times when a bus is delayed because of the way that the route is structured, and we're looking into that as well, because every single route that we have, with the exception of the 2 hybrid routes that are out there right now, 712 and 19, have a 10-minute recovery on them built in. And that 10-minute recovery does not work with detours, with the impacts of the traffic. And so we're looking into doing even more route planning in the future. We just had a conversation earlier today about, do you bring back a route, or do you add service, or in addition to bringing back routes, do you add service to assist routes that are behind because of these pop-up reasons? And so we thought the best thing to do is really to do both. And so we're looking into that as well.
All set?
Yes, thank you.
Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you. Just some questions around explanations of performance measures. Fixed route service rides, 233,652. Is that bus rides, or is that people on the bus?
It's the number of boardings.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I do see that there is a fare, and I'm just curious, and maybe this is a budgeting situation, but I'm just curious why we don't see a revenue line here, since people do pay for the bus. We just simply see an appropriation, and we don't see revenues. And truthfully, I mean, once you start adding that up, I mean, even at a blended rate, which is about 87 cents per ride, if you factor in students and whatnot, it's about $240,000. So I'm just curious why we don't see that as a revenue line.
Julie?
I can take a crack, and I'm going to embarrass myself because Camille knows the details, but I'll take a broad brush crack at this.
Not asking
Director's
yet.
all over that.
I'll start by saying this. The federal formula funding and the way that the city actually receives its funding from Federal Transit Administration is relatively complicated. And I know I've spoken to you several times about things that are complicated are a little scary, and this is one example of that. With that FTA funding that's received, the municipality is required to provide a level of match support to receive those federal monies that come in. Broadly, the revenues that we collect through what we refer to as our fare box, which is the bus fares being paid, is actually used as part of that formula, although not directly as a match per se, but it directly buys down the amount of match that the community actually has to provide in exchange for those federal monies that are coming in. And so you don't see them reflected within the budget as a revenue, but they are actually a part of the match equation that allows us to receive the federal funds through 5307 for operational expenses.
Okay.
How did I do?
Great.
Well said. Yes, Alderman O'Brien?
Yeah, thank you. This really doesn't have that much to do with the budget, although it maybe perhaps it could. But Mr. Correa, are you familiar that the city is looking as part of its infrastructure, working with the fire department and everything, of increasing the Opticom system? Now, many communities have taken that very same Opticom system and use the transmitters, and of course it's a computer-generated program that will work specifically. It's not gonna clear the whole intersection, but it might get you a right on, red or something like that. And have you looked into that, and is this granting or anything else? If we're gonna change the system, I would kind of hope that we would get the best for our tax dollars. And I just wonder if you're aware of any of that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, we're part of this conversation, or the part of the conversation that the city of Nashua is having in regards to that software. And we may not be one of the top tiers in order to assist with the lights and the amount of time that it may take us to get through a light, but that it would increase the probability that the light would change quicker. And that would be very helpful.
I think it has an environmental impact, because then you don't have a diesel or whatever idling at a red light. So it does make sense.
And CNG, right?
Yeah.
Well said.
Okay.
Alderman Lopez?
So I want to start by saying, one of the things that National Transit has been doing that I've been seeing is they are hiring people and they are staffing, and they're not getting people who are just doing it for money. They're doing a good job of engaging drivers who want to be drivers and want to be city bus drivers. I've seen 3, maybe 4 really, really good drivers start over the last 2 months. In fact, today was the lady's first time, and she handled a lot all at once. When we talk about the construction detours and all that kind of stuff, that results for the drivers in a bunch of people getting on the bus being like, why are you 20, for me it was 20 minutes late, but I didn't ask, okay, because I understand they're already stressed. But I watched a bunch of people get on and ask, like, which route is this even? Like, is this the 6 or the 6A? Because it was a stop that would have been on either one, but it was so in between, they didn't know where they were going or what the bus was doing. There were a number of new riders coming on and have been coming on more and more recently. And there's a lot of complexities in figuring out transfers, giving directions, all that kind of stuff. So drivers are doing a lot of work in addition to driving, in addition to dealing with circumstances that other departments in the city may not be communicating effectively to them. So I think in terms of bang for our buck, when it comes to did we get what was worth it by increasing the available budget, at least for them to hire? Yeah, I'm very confident. I know Director Sullivan doesn't necessarily want to speak to it prematurely, but I can tell when there's a bus driver who's there and is taking their job seriously and is engaging everybody who comes in. So I think that part is very effectively leveraged. I understand the logic of saying we don't this year want to try to figure out what our fixed routes are going to be, because as Alderman Jetty pointed out and Director Sullivan as well, it's hard to figure out exactly what the ultimate consumer needs are going to be when your consumer base has been constantly impacted by 20 to 30 minute waits on very important things. A number of circumstances that I could point to are, for example, Gatewood and Palm Square. I hear about it when the residents can't get to the bus in time, and that is difficult for people with mobility impairments and that type of stuff. There's alternate routes and alternate strategies that NTS puts into play, like the paratransit and sending vans out to make sure that they're grabbing anybody who's caught. But that also affects, as wonderful it is to have the little bus show up and be your private ride to somewhere, it also affects rider trust. So people are trying to find other ways around traveling on the bus in some situations because it's unstable. There's new opportunities for traveling too, like insurance-based transportation. So there's a lot of variables in place that, like, I understand the idea that we don't necessarily want to drop another $100,000 into the budget, hire a bunch of drivers, and then figure out what we're doing with them on the fly. That's very expensive. It requires the buses to be operational that might otherwise be, better served as in a standby role. And I think it's a very difficult and very complex operation. I think the investment in the electronic communication will be not only an opportunity for us to see as riders where the bus is and what its ETA is, but also probably to figure out user data and maybe get a better sense of where people are trying to, get transportation to or from. And I think that the suggestion that maybe instead of just adding more routes and making shorter routes, making sure there's redundancy within the route structure that exists is also not only a very pragmatic solution, but probably going to be a cost-effective one too, because there have been plenty of situations where, like, the handicap ramp doesn't work exactly right, or whatever thing is happening, and the entire bus has to pull over at the main station in order to transfer onto another one. So making sure you have a backup plan is important, especially when you have that many riders on hand. I think Nashua Transit has been doing a lot with what they have. I do think there might be some additional disconnect with regards to people applying for jobs and the variance of response they might be getting from, like, First Recruiter versus the people at the, working at Nashua Transit directly. So that might be an area for fine tuning in terms of partnership. But I think we're definitely on the right track, and it does make sense to monitor this as we go. It's just inconvenient to the budget process because we don't know. I believe your favorite phrase is unknown unknowns. There's a lot of them when you talk about buses. You change one thing and another thing changes.
I have one question. We're having problems getting school bus drivers. Are we paying a comparable rate to first student?
Yes, we're paying a competitive rate, but frankly, we're in competition to some extent. There are different companies at this point in time. First Student is one of our direct competitors, and I hesitate to say that, but we are paying a competitive rate to the drivers that may otherwise be going to work for First Student. With the school year ending, that represents, quite frankly, an opportunity for us, and one that I don't think we'll miss taking advantage of, but it's unfortunate that there's generally a lack of drivers in the market that we have to self-cannibalize, but unfortunately that's the reality at this point in time.
Alderman O'Brien?
Thank you. Mr. Sullivan, can we trip back a little bit to earlier in the conversation? You brought up a park, which is Los Amigos Park, and the work that's being there is completely outstanding. But there's 8 other wards, and many of them have many different parks. And I know I've worked for 8 years trying to get St. Andrews Field done. I went through 3 or 4, directors of Park Rec and everything. Alderman Sullivan has jumped on board with it. And it kind of makes me wonder if is this like the sore thumb, St. Andrews? Or do we have somewhat of an infrastructure with parks that needs to be looked at as addressed? And is there federal fundings for these type of situations to upgrade the parks and different things like that, that would come under community development?
Alderman O'Brien, I think a few comments and responses to that. I'd be remiss if I did not say that I think Mr. Brian Conant, obviously the Parks and Rec Superintendent, is probably better equipped to speak to the larger issue of park funding across the city. But relative to the role that community development funding might play or other federal funds might play, it's not unprecedented, first of all, for community development to seek funds to improve a public space that might be known as a park. I think the Library Plaza is one example of that, where we were highly effective through the support and assistance of Pamela Davies in securing congressionally directed spending there. I certainly think that we might be eligible to apply for additional funds. But that brings me to another point that I think is it's important to point out, and I can't speak in detail to St. Andrews, but the Your Voice, Your Choice program has been focused on active and participatory budgeting in neighborhoods and sections of the city that may often be disengaged or not have had access to the budgeting process or the process generally for identifying priorities for infrastructure improvements. That's really the biggest reason why this sort of specialized effort was created and led by the mayor several years ago to create an alternative and ideally a more approachable method for individuals living in those neighborhoods that may be more vulnerable or lower income generally, or not English speaking. Name the vulnerability, those are the folks who we're dealing with. It gave them a special opportunity to participate directly in selecting an effort that they'd like to bring forward above all other efforts in the city. And so I sort of want to put aside Your Voice, Your Choice in a sense, because that's a very unique methodology and program intended to fund any improvement, not just a park. It could in fact be the creation of additional lighting, as we're doing in the Tree Streets neighborhood. It could be installation of drainage infrastructure, if that's something that a neighborhood wanted for some reason. So I think Your Voice, Your Choice exists independently of more widespread park funding issues across the city. That said, I know Alderman Sullivan, Alderman Camo, and others have led efforts over the last year to get funding allocated to parks that are particularly important to their constituents. I certainly think Brian Conant would come here and say that we have additional need to fund our parks and improvements there too, and certainly Lisa Photo would, or Director Photo would as well. But luckily for me, I don't know that that's my issue to solve directly, but I do want to say for the record that we're happy to assist in grant writing or implementation of any funds that might be available to the city to improve any of the parks that might be coming to top of mind of any of the aldermen sitting around the table tonight.
Well, it's very good.
No, it's just a follow-up, if I may, just more of a comment. I think you highlighted it. Maybe, I do not know where Director Photo is aware that, she can apply to look at grants, or maybe she is, to work with you together on something like this. And if the money is out there from the feds, then we would be amiss if we don't try to get as much as our fair share of what everybody else is getting,
And I certainly would, just to follow up on that, I don't want to make it seem as though federal funds exist everywhere for park improvements.
No, I understand.
Because Director Photo is working very hard to try and seek funds and find funds for any of the infrastructure improvements she's talking about. But I mean only to say that we're part of a sort of a multi-jurisdictional team internally that's looking at all federally available funds. And we've been very successful over the last period of years. I expect we'll continue to do that, and park funding is no doubt a priority of that too.
Nice job. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan.
All right, unless there's some last minute questions. Seeing none, Alderman O'Brien, do you have a motion?
Yes, I do. A motion to table R-23-125, which is the budget.
The motion is to table R-23-125, the budget. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. General discussion? Oh, your people are free to go. I know you have to work in the morning.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Any general discussion? No. No public Remarks by Alderman?
Thank you also for being there for them, because sometimes.
Yes,
you know,
Alderman Wilson.
freezing in here. Answer questions, something's going
I
on.
think if you get in
So
contact
excited
with
that
the
we're
president of the
moving
Board of
forward with
Aldermen, we might be able to do
Ah,
something about that.
Thank you. We'll have that data working for boarding and getting off.
It always has been.
Always, if I'm always to wear a
Yep, that's right. Sometimes
It
you
is
don't
chilly.
really understand the play of the field.
Is that under
If
Alderman
we can do
comment?
something to better.
Oh, stand by, I do have a very important motion coming up.
Motion?
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Motion on the floor is to adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We're adjourned at 8:49 PM.